You drove to work this morning. You braked hard once, maybe twice. You exceeded 80 miles per hour on the highway. Your car recorded all of it. And while you were sitting in traffic, it sent that information to a company you have never heard of, who turned it into a number, who sold that number to your insurance company. Your premium went up. You have no idea why. This is not a story about hackers. This is not a dystopian future. This is how the system already works for millions of drivers in America, and most of them have no idea it is happening. In March 2024, a New York Times investigation revealed something that changed how we understand modern vehicles. General Motors, one of the largest automakers in the world, had been secretly collecting detailed driving data from millions of vehicles and selling it to data brokers who sold it to insurance companies who used it to raise rates or deny coverage. The guiding question that carries this whole film is simple. When your car becomes a surveillance device, who actually owns the data exhaust of your daily life? Let me tell you about Romeo Chicco. Romeo lives in Florida. In December 2023, he tried to renew his car insurance. He had a clean record, no accidents, no tickets. He expected the usual quote. Instead, 7 insurance companies rejected him. 7. When he finally found coverage, his premium had nearly doubled. He could not understand what had changed. Then he requested his LexisNexis report. LexisNexis is a data broker, one of those companies that collects information about you from dozens of sources and packages it into a profile that businesses pay to access. What Romeo found was 258 pages documenting his driving life in granular detail. Every trip he took over 6 months, the start times, the end times, every instance of hard braking, every time he exceeded 80 miles per hour, 640 trips, catalogued and scored.
A driver says he found a 258-page report on his habits.
The data came from his Cadillac. He never signed up for a driving monitoring program. He never agreed to share this information with his insurance company, but his car had been transmitting it the whole time, and General Motors had been selling it to data brokers, who sold it to insurers, who used it to decide he was too risky to cover at his old rate. Romeo filed a lawsuit. It was the first of many. Here is the bridge line you need to keep in your head for the rest of this film. A car is a product. A telematics system is infrastructure, and that infrastructure has been quietly converted into a surveillance pipeline that monetizes your daily commute. To understand how this works, you need to understand what is physically inside your car. Starting with model year 2015, General Motors installed a component called the Vehicle Communication Interface Module, or VCIM, in most of its vehicles: Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, Cadillac. This module is a compact, self-contained unit that serves as the nerve center linking your vehicle to the outside world. It houses a cellular modem for network connectivity, a GPS receiver for location tracking, and internal processors to manage communication between your vehicle and GM's servers. The VCIM was marketed as the backbone of OnStar, the crash notification system, the stolen vehicle locator, the remote unlock feature, safety and convenience wrapped in a monthly subscription. But the same hardware that enables those features also enables something else: data collection, constant, granular, invisible data collection. The feature was called Smart Driver. On paper, it sounded helpful. Drive well, get insights about your driving habits, maybe qualify for insurance discounts. In practice, it was something different. Upon enrollment, the system collected hard braking events, hard acceleration events, speeds over 80 miles per hour, trip start and end times, distance driven, and depending on configuration, precise location data. The module transmitted this data over the cellular network continuously. Your car was always connected. Your driving was always logged. The module does not care whether you are subscribed to OnStar services. As long as the cellular connection is active, the data flows. By 2022, more than 8 million vehicles were enrolled in Smart Driver, according to internal GM documents reviewed by the New York Times. That is not a pilot program. That is mass surveillance. The data flowed from your vehicle through GM servers to 2 data brokers, LexisNexis Risk Solutions and Verisk Analytics.
They're a massive company. They do a lot of things. One thing that they do is they're a consumer reporting agency for insurance companies. They are also a public records vendor.
Those companies process the raw data into something called a driving score, an algorithmic risk assessment based on your behavior behind the wheel. Then they sold those scores to insurance companies. The insurers used the scores to adjust premiums, deny coverage, or cancel policies. The entire pipeline operated in the background. Drivers had no visibility into the data being collected, no understanding that it was being sold, no notification when their insurance company accessed it. Now, the insurance industry will tell you a different story. They call this usage-based insurance, or UBI. The premise sounds reasonable. Instead of pricing your policy based on demographics and age, location and credit score, why not price it based on how you actually drive? Good drivers pay less, risky drivers pay more, fair and personalized.
This unique, tailored approach will give your customers greater control over their insurance costs.
Insurance companies have been pushing telematics for years. Programs like Progressive Snapshot, Allstate's DriveWise, State Farm's Drive Safe and Save. You install a device or use an app, the company monitors your driving, and you get a discount if you perform well. Allstate advertises potential savings of up to 40%. But here is the critical difference. Those programs require you to opt in. You choose to participate. You understand the trade-off, data for discounts. What GM did was different. Drivers were enrolled through deliberately confusing interfaces. They did not know they were participating in a monitoring program, and when the data reached insurers, it was not used to lower premiums, it was used to raise them. Verisk, one of the data brokers, made an important admission during the Senate investigation. Their contracts with automakers and insurers did not require that driver telematics data only be used to provide discounts. The data could be used for anything, including deciding you were too risky to insure at your current rate. The system was designed to capture data regardless of whether it would help or hurt the driver. The sorting happened after. And here is a detail that sounds almost too absurd to be real. Senators Ron Wyden and Edward Markey investigated this system in 2024. They found that Hyundai received just over $1 million for data from 1.7 million vehicles. Honda received under $26,000 for data from 97,000 vehicles. That works out to roughly 26 cents per driver. Your privacy was sold for the price of a postage stamp. General Motors made more. Their annual revenue from Smart Driver was in the low millions of dollars, according to the Times. Not transformative money for a company that size, but the damage to drivers was not measured in millions. It was measured in premium increases, coverage denials, and the fundamental breach of an assumption most people hold without thinking about it, that your car is a private space. That assumption is wrong, and it is not just GM. The Mozilla Foundation, the nonprofit behind the Firefox browser, published a study in September 2023. They reviewed the privacy practices of 25 major car brands: Ford, Toyota, Volkswagen, BMW, and Tesla. The result was unprecedented. All 25 brands earned their privacy not included warning label. Cars were declared the official worst category of products for privacy that Mozilla had ever reviewed. Worse than smart home devices, worse than fitness trackers, worse than dating apps. 84% of the brands they studied shared data with outside companies. 76% sold it, and 56% admitted to sharing data with government or law enforcement in response to informal requests. Nissan's privacy policy was described by the researchers as, quote, probably the most mind-boggling, creepy, scary, sad, messed up privacy policy we have ever read. Think about that statement. A privacy research team that reads these documents professionally, that has reviewed hundreds of companies across dozens of product categories, found a car manufacturer's privacy policy to be the worst they had ever encountered. The industry response was predictable. GM claimed the practice was common industry practice. That was technically true. The problem was not that GM was an outlier. The problem was that the entire industry had quietly normalized car surveillance without informing the people who bought the cars. But how did drivers end up enrolled in this system without knowing it? That is where the story turns darker. The FTC investigated and found what they called a misleading enrollment process. When customers bought a GM vehicle, they went through an onboarding process at the dealership. Somewhere in that process, They were presented with screens asking them to set up OnStar connected services, safety features, diagnostic alerts, the ability to unlock your car remotely. But here is the deception. Consent for safety alerts was bundled with consent for Smart Driver. The screens did not clearly separate them. A customer who thought they were signing up for crash notification was also, in the same click, agreeing to have their driving data collected and sold. Worse, dealership employees told customers that failing to enroll would result in their vehicle's safety features being deactivated. That was not true, but it created pressure to click yes. And here is a detail that reveals the architecture of incentives. Dealership employees could earn commissions for signing customers up for Smart Driver. The surveillance system came with sales incentives. Even drivers who thought they had opted out were not safe. The FTC found that GM shared location data on all drivers who activated the internet connection in their car, even if they never enrolled in Smart Driver. If you connected to get traffic updates or used the navigation system, your location data was being collected. There is a term in privacy research called consent theater. It describes the practice of obtaining legally defensible consent through interfaces that are deliberately designed to be confusing, overwhelming, or pressured. The person clicks yes, so technically they agreed, but no reasonable person understood what they were agreeing to. The consent was real in law and fictional in practice. GM's enrollment screens were consent theater. The bundled permissions, the implied threats about safety features, the sales commissions for signups, all of it engineered to produce a yes without producing understanding. Picture the moment this hits. You log into LexisNexis to request your consumer disclosure report. The law requires them to provide it if you ask. A few weeks later, an envelope arrives. Inside is a document that reads like a diary you never wrote. Dates, times, distances, and every hard break you made for months, all of it transmitted by a machine you paid for, collected by a company you never heard of, sold to businesses deciding how much to charge you for insurance. That is not a hypothetical. That is what Ken Dahl found. Ken is a software company owner near Seattle. He drives a Chevrolet Bolt. He has never been responsible for an accident. In 2022, his insurance premium jumped 21%. When he asked an insurance agent why, he was told his LexisNexis report was a factor. He requested the report. It was 258 pages. More than 130 pages documented every trip he and his wife had taken in the Bolt over 6 months. "I do not know the definition of hard brake," he said. "My passenger's head is not hitting the dash. Same with acceleration. I am not peeling out. I am not sure how the car defines that." He was being scored by metrics he could not see, against thresholds he did not know, by algorithms that stripped context from data. Emergency braking to avoid an accident looks exactly the same in the data as aggressive driving. The system does not know the difference. It does not care. The regulatory response came slowly, then all at once. On August 13, 2024, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton sued General Motors. The complaint alleged that GM unlawfully collected and sold the private driving data of over 1.5 million Texans without their knowledge or consent. Paxton called it a comprehensive surveillance system that millions of drivers never asked for. On February 26, 2025, Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin filed suit. The complaint alleged that GM monitored and sold customer driving data for more than 10 years, affecting over 100,000 Arkansas residents. By then, regulators were no longer asking whether this happened. They were asking how long it had been happening. On July 8, 2025, Nebraska Attorney General Mike Hilgers joined the cascade. His lawsuit alleged that GM had been deceptively collecting and selling sensitive driving data from Nebraskans for at least a decade. On February 26, 2026, Iowa Attorney General Brenna Bird filed suit, calling GM's practices a violation of the Iowa Consumer Fraud Act. GM profited handsomely from selling this driving data, her office stated, resulting in millions of dollars of revenue, while Iowans faced higher insurance rates, denied coverage, or canceled policies. And then came the federal intervention. On January 14, 2026, the Federal Trade Commission finalized an order settling allegations that GM and OnStar collected and sold geolocation data without consumers' informed consent.
the Federal Trade Commission has finalized an order settling allegations at General Motors and OnStar.
The order was severe. A 5-year ban on GM disclosing consumers' geolocation and driver behavior data to consumer reporting agencies, a requirement to obtain affirmative express consent before collecting, using, or sharing connected vehicle data, the creation of a mechanism for consumers to request copies of their data and demand deletion, a requirement for drivers to be able to disable geolocation collection if their vehicle has the necessary technology. All of it enforceable for 20 years. This fencing in relief is appropriate, the FTC wrote, given GM's egregious betrayal of consumers' trust. The word egregious does not appear often in federal regulatory filings. When it does, it means something. What happened to the data brokers? Verisk, one of the 2 companies that bought driver data from GM, shut down its driver behavior data product in June 2024. The backlash was too intense, the regulatory scrutiny too hot. They stopped receiving data from automakers and stopped providing reports to insurers. LexisNexis did not stop. As of this recording, LexisNexis Risk Solutions continues to prominently promote its driver behavior data product to insurers. Their website still boasts about bringing automakers and insurance carriers together. The infrastructure remains intact. One pipe closed, the other stayed open. And GM was not the only automaker facing consequences. On March 12, 2025, the California Privacy Protection Agency announced a settlement with Honda. The automaker agreed to pay a $632,500 fine and change its business practices to resolve claims that it violated the California Consumer Privacy Act. Honda had made it too difficult for consumers to submit privacy rights requests. It did not have adequate contracts in place to protect the consumer data it shared or sold. Honda was the first major enforcement action from California's new privacy regulator against a connected vehicle manufacturer. It will not be the last. The CPPA had announced in July 2023 that it was conducting a broad review of the data privacy practices of connected vehicle manufacturers and related technologies. The Honda settlement was the first fruit of that investigation. Now consider the contrast with Europe. Under the General Data Protection Regulation, which has been enforced since 2018, vehicle manufacturers operating in Europe face significantly stricter rules. The General Data Protection Regulation mandates that only necessary data can be collected. It requires explicit user consent before processing personal data, and violations can result in fines of up to 20 million euros or 4% of global annual revenue, whichever is higher. The European Data Protection Board has issued specific guidelines on connected vehicles, emphasizing that vehicle manufacturers must implement data protection by design, that data collected should remain under the control of the data subject, and that processing must be limited to what is strictly necessary for the service. The United States has no equivalent federal law specifically governing connected car data privacy. Instead, there is a patchwork of state laws, California's Consumer Privacy Act, and sector-specific regulations that were never designed for vehicles that transmit gigabytes of data about their occupants. This regulatory gap explains why American drivers became the test subjects for mass automotive surveillance, while European drivers received at least nominal protection. The data pipelines exist in both regions, but the rules governing them are different. So here is where we are. GM vehicles from 2015 onwards came equipped with surveillance infrastructure marketed as safety features. Drivers were enrolled in data collection through deliberately confusing interfaces. Their driving was monitored trip by trip, break by break. That data was sold for pennies to data brokers who converted it into risk scores. Insurance companies accessed those scores and raised premiums or denied coverage without explaining why. Drivers had no idea this was happening until journalists and regulators started asking questions. The FTC's 5-year ban expires in 2031. The state lawsuits are ongoing. The question is whether the pressure creates lasting change or just a temporary pause. Because the fundamental problem has not been solved. Your car is still a computer on wheels. It still has sensors and an internet connection. The data it generates has value to someone, and the consent mechanisms that govern access to that data are still designed to be ignored. Right now, you can request your own LexisNexis report at consumer.risk.lexisnexis.com. You can request your Verisk report at fcra.verisk.com. What you find might explain your last insurance quote, or it might show nothing because your automaker used a different broker, or because the data was siloed somewhere else in the system. The opacity is part of the design. If you drive a GM vehicle from 2015 or newer, check your My Chevrolet or My GMC app. Look for Smart Driver. See if it has been collecting your data. If it has, you can disable it. But disabling it in the app may not stop the data collection. Some users have reported that turning off Smart Driver in the app does not actually stop the telematics module from transmitting data. To truly stop it, you may need to disable the cellular connection entirely. That is the trade-off the system forces you to make. Keep connectivity and accept surveillance, or kill the connection and lose the features you paid for. And here is the uncomfortable truth. GM was not uniquely bad. They were just the ones who got caught first. All 25 car brands in Mozilla's study failed. The practices are industry-wide. The only question is which company's internal documents will surface next. Long before telematics, before connected cars, before driving scores and data brokers, there was a simpler relationship between a person and their vehicle. You bought a car. It took you places. What happened between origin and destination was your business and no one else's. The road was a space of anonymity. You could drive across the country and no one would know unless you told them. That world is gone. It did not disappear through some dramatic announcement. It eroded quietly, one feature at a time, one consent form at a time, one data pipeline at a time. The car that used to be an extension of your freedom became an extension of a surveillance network. The question we are left with is not whether we can return to the old world. We cannot. The question is whether we can build rules for the new one that respect the people inside the machines. Rules that require real consent instead of consent theater. Rules that give drivers visibility into their own data. Rules that make the data exhaust of daily life belong to the person who generated it, not the company that captured it. The FTC's order is a start. The state lawsuits are pressure. But enforcement alone will not change the architecture. The sensors are still in the cars. The connections are still live. The incentives to monetize have not disappeared. What has to change is the assumption. The assumption that data collection is harmless because it is invisible. The assumption that consent buried on page 21 of a legal agreement counts as agreement. The assumption that your car is just a car and not a node in a network that profits from watching you. If you have made it this far, you now know more about how this system works than most drivers will ever learn. That knowledge is worth something. Use it. Check your reports. Audit your settings. Ask questions. And the next time you buy a car, read the privacy policy, not because you will understand it, because the act of reading it is the first step toward demanding something better. I will leave you with one question. If the data your car collects belongs to you, why did you find out it was being sold from a news article instead of from the company that sold it? The machine still looks like freedom. The infrastructure behaves like surveillance. Thanks for watching. This was Dr. Claus. If you want more films about the hidden systems that shape our lives, I will put a couple on screen now. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.